Before I introduce this very impressive group of people that are going to help us have the discussion tonight, let me just introduce myself. So as I said, I'm Cole Duthie. My work includes supporting people and organisational leaders in particular to navigate change, which includes some of the broad changes that are happening in our society. I design retreats and workshops and lunches and dinners and spaces for people to come together to have important and sometimes tricky conversations in a safe space. Locally, I'm past chair of the Give Where You Live Foundation, and I'm currently chairing a new organisation based in Geelong called Neighbourhood Economics, and I'm very pleased to be have been invited to host this discussion tonight, which I'm sure you all agree, otherwise you wouldn't be here, is both a very interesting and important conversation for us to have. So thank you again for coming. I'm genuinely looking forward to the conversation we're going to have tonight. This very schmick and impressive looking group of people beside me are going to help us have the discussion tonight. And my apologies in advance, I'm going to read their bios because I don't want to miss out on anything important that they bring to the table. So immediately to my left is Peter Villeman. Peter's a paediatrician and is the Clinical Director of Research at Barwon Health and Chair in Medicine at Deakin University. Peter leads a research program designed to create new knowledge regarding early life origins of health in the modern environment, to test new interventions in large-scale clinical trials and translate robust evidence into improved clinical and public health outcomes. Sounds very impressive, Peter. Thanks for that work. I think if we haven't come across misinformation in the area of medicine and medical research, we've probably been living under a rock, right? So Peter, it's great to have you here to help us sort of navigate this kind of area of misinformation. Simon was been recently appointed as principal at the Geelong College. Congratulations, Simon. Simon's a dynamic educational leader who believes in the power of education to bring people together, strengthen communities and create opportunities for every student. Simon holds a Master of Educational Leadership from the University of Western Australia and a Master of Business Administration with Deakin University. He also holds a Bachelor of Education with Griffith University and a Bachelor of Physical Education with the Australian College of Physical Education. Again, Simon, representing schools and education, I'm sure most of us, when we think of misinformation, disinformation, while we're all part of the milieu that is caught up in this phenomenon, most of us probably think about our children and grandkids and the young people coming through. So really important to have your perspective tonight. So thanks for being here, Simon. Ika Trijsburg is the Director of Urban Analytics at the ANU Institute for Infrastructure in Society and the Crawford School of Public Policy and Head of Democracy and Diplomacy at the Municipal Association of Victoria. Importantly for tonight's conversation, Ika leads the Disinformation in the City project across 5 Australian universities and was the lead author in the world first Disinformation in the City Response Playbook, which was published 2024. Ika has provided guidance on disinformation response to key actors globally, including cities, national governments, international networks and UN agencies. So our conversation is going to be much richer tonight for having your perspective in the room. Ika, we're going to lean on you for to help us out when we get stuck on some of the technical things around this. So thanks for being here. And last but certainly not least, Michael Thomas. Michael's the Manager of Research at Barwon Water, Victoria's largest regional water corporation. Barwon Water has a portfolio of more than 30 innovation projects focused on the circular economy, emerging contaminants and smart water networks. Michael previously served for 20 years as an officer in the Australian Army, including operational service in signals intelligence in Timor-Leste and combat engineering. Michael's done a PhD in international relations, which interestingly was about the implications of climate change in the military, and also has a Masters of Project Management. Awesome to have you here, Michael, and I know that when we think about how organisations like yours, Barwon Water, operates in the community, how we navigate misinformation in that context is going to be really important as well. I was going to ask you to welcome them after each one, but I forgot because I'm a little bit nervous doing this, so, but please put your hands together and welcome our panellists. So, tonight's conversation, even though we know it's about misinformation and disinformation, has got so many different angles on it, right? So we want to try and unpack the problem and how it sort of shows up in our society. We're probably going to end up talking about trust at some point and how trust functions and where we find trusted sources. We're not going to avoid the conversation about algorithms and echo chambers. It's going to be part of the conversation for sure. We're going to talk about community impact and vulnerable parts of the community and where this is showing up most. But certainly we want to get to a point in the conversation where we're starting to help each other with practical responses. So as we were talking about downstairs before, I hope that we don't all leave more overwhelmed than we already are with the nature of the problem, and that we can all stick up our hands as learners in this space and say, what are some of the things that we're hearing tonight that can help us sort of navigate this, both as individuals, as families and communities. So we're going to kick off the conversation tonight, and hopefully you'll hear much less of my voice from now on. But I've got just an intro question that I'm going to put to each of the panellists, and going to ask them to respond to that. And the question is, where is disinformation and misinformation showing up for each of you in your context? And just some broad response to what you're learning about how to help people respond to that. Before we go to the panel's responses to that, I'm just going to go to you first, Ika, and help us just define some terms so that we know when we say misinformation, we know what we're talking about. What are some other important terms that show up, like fake news, or just in your work? Just help us define some terms.
Thank you, and hi everyone. Lovely to see you all here this evening. So hands up if you feel confident that you know what disinformation means. Yeah? I'm not going to ask you. It's okay. It's not a pop quiz. Or misinformation. Little bit more. Okay. And that there's a difference between them. So disinformation, which is the majority of my work, is deliberately false information that is deliberately shared. That takes a whole variety of forms. So it can mean deep fake content. So it can mean at one end things like deep fake pornography, which is an AI-generated image of someone in a context that never existed. Or it can also be of a person that never existed at times. It can also be used to make it look like someone is saying something that they didn't say, a video portraying something that didn't happen, those sorts of things. We see them increasingly used in communities, against political leaders, all sorts of things. We've also got text-based disinformation, so all sorts of things that we might read, particularly on social media, where someone is deliberately saying that something has happened or not happened, or misrepresenting it, so that it will provoke a particular response in the audience. So it's lying with intent. Misinformation, by comparison, is not with intent. So misinformation is false information, but it might be that a neighbour heard something and thinks it sounds pretty reasonable and then shares it with their neighbour. It can also be incredibly damaging. So misinformation can include things like claiming that a particular vaccine is not safe when it is safe, or that it has side effects that it does not have. Those sorts of things that can really impact people's behaviours in very, very damaging ways. Fake news is I feel like you've all heard that one. Fake news is when things are printed, usually in a media outlet. It may be a well-known, reputable outlet, or it may be a very dubious outlet. But the term refers to something that is fabricated. But most usually, it's used, particularly by politicians, as part of what's called the liar's dividend. So when people want to be able to get out of any situation, and they can say that it was fake news. So even if, for example, you might be a prince and there's a photo of you doing something very compromising, you can say that is fabricated and you can say it's fake news. And so it's actually very, very damaging in that way, because it allows people to actually not see the consequences of their behaviours. I feel like that's a good 3 that you can start with.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ika. So maybe, Michael, can we start with you from a Barwon Water perspective? Where is misinformation and disinformation showing up for you?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Such an important topic of conversation. It's topical globally right now. If I think from a water perspective, probably the biggest challenge, but I guess source of and contributor to disinformation and misinformation is on the issue of climate change. I think that it's so important to the water sector. It's such an important thing. I mean, climate science, we rely on climate science for long-range forecasts. We build and deploy assets that go in the ground for decades. And so we need to know, with the best precision and confidence that we can, based on climate models, what that's going to be like, what the rainfall going into our catchments is in the next decade, in the next 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, long-range, those long-range predictions. Because if we get that wrong, then we might miss building the next water augmentation to support our communities. And that's fundamentally what we do at Barwon Water. We've really got to look far ahead, look what's happening, get the infrastructure in place, and then do that planning accordingly. And I think of other impacts of climate change on the water sector. It's not just, I suppose, those major augmentations where we rely on those long-term climate models, but it's also things like extreme events impacting on current day infrastructure. So understanding, are they becoming more frequent? Where are they occurring? What types? And so there's a whole range of I suppose it's just so critical as an issue. And I think we've all seen in the last decade, certainly in Australia in the last 15 years, of the challenged political environment. It's a very obviously hyper-politicised issue. And so, for agencies working, particularly water authorities working within that construct, very difficult. And so what can we do about it? Really, providing clear, accurate information, being a source of trust that the community can turn to rely on. I often think about, often government agencies and institutions can get sort of punched down a little bit, and it's easy to do that, but I think we need to build them up. I take a different opinion. We need to build up the capacities and the capabilities of government institutions so that they can be a source of trust that the community can turn to for accurate information. And I suppose also, I guess it's going to come up in the topic of conversation this evening, but if we look what's happening in the United States around, if we take the issue of climate change, literally described as a hoax at the very highest levels of government. So that can contribute to that misinformation, disinformation, and sow the seed of doubt within community that becomes uncertain where to look for guidance on it. Yeah.
I feel like this might be a little bit, a little bit of a jumping ahead in the conversation, but just listening to you, Michael, when you're talking about science and science as a trusted source, just talk to us about how you, because we're making some assumptions there about where the trusted information is coming from, right? So when someone stands up and says climate change is a hoax, so within a frame that says science is trustworthy, then that feels like, or that is misinformation or maybe disinformation. But how do you determine where to go for trusted source of?
It's a really good question, Cole. I think, and I'd be interested in Peter's take on this as well, but I was thinking in the lead up to this presentation, we have to go back, from a science perspective, ask ourselves, what is the process of science? What is that method that's given us all these advances in the last 100, 200 years from where we've been previously? The idea that you can have a hypothesis, you go out there, you collect data, you repeat that method over and over again. You publish it, you put it out there to scientific communities, you put it out there to communities. You're really testing the veracity of this observed data, and you're coming out with theories, and that'll be published, and it's put out there to be challenged. And that's the process of science. It's deliberately put out there to be challenged based on observations, so that it's always sort of navigating and approximating to the truth, to what factual truth as best we can, develop those theories and so forth. So, that process of science is so important. It's so critical and so central to establishing, from a scientific process, arriving at as best an approach to the truth as can be possibly, derived. And I think for government agencies, the role in that, it's important to build those agencies up to continue on with that research, building on the bodies of evidence that we've had built up over literally hundreds of years.
Great, thanks, Michael. Simon, it's a cliche to say, but schools are not the same as when I was a boy, right? Massive changes and changes happening really quickly. How is misinformation and disinformation showing up in the education system?
Oh, Cole, thank you, and thanks for everyone for being here, but schools they're not the same as they were last year either. This AI wave is coming hard at us, as it is for everyone, but and that's changing the nature of what we need to do on a day-to-day basis. And then staying in front of that wave, particularly as teaching staff, is enormously challenging as well, because it feels a little bit like COVID, where we've got to be across the remote learning tools before the students who are far more savvy and pick up on these things far more quickly than a lot of us in front of them. I think I was thinking about Ika's sort of terminology and definitions there, and I always think if I'm trying to explain this to some students, what is the information I'm giving them, I kind of liken misinformation to rumours, and we deal with those every day, particularly when you're dealing with young people all of the time, and rumours spread rapidly now through technology and mobile devices. And then the disinformation element is sort of around impersonation, and I think again that was touched on with deep fakes and those sorts of things. We're dealing with that on a day-to-day basis, which is enormously challenging for young people, and I guess I know we'll get into a deeper dive a little later on, but for me, I just want our young people particularly, and I probably should put the staff into this bracket too, but I'll stay with the young people. I want them to be curious about everything, curious learners, which means that they'll ask the second and third question and challenge things rather than just accept that that's the norm. I don't know how many people ever saw it, but I remember it was a while ago now, but there was and I actually showed this in a school assembly a number of years ago when I was trying to address rumours that were flying around the school at the time. And it was on 60 Minutes, and George Negus was interviewing Margaret Thatcher. And I won't go into the details, but he was sort of challenging her on something, and he said, well, everyone's talking about it. And she said, well, who's talking about it? He said, well, people on the street. She said, which street? And he said, well, people. And he said, well, what are their names? And he turned into a sort of a bumbling mess because he didn't know where to go. But for me, it's always been asked that next, second, third question, and don't believe everything that you hear and half of what you see. Maybe it's the other way around, actually. But
there's something quite profound about that. If you're sitting there trying to make mental notes of tips and things to take away, I reckon that's a cracker. Like, the second and third question is a really good one, right? So, because we're used to digesting things really quickly, whether it's, we're kind of just scrolling or, so that stopping, pausing, second or third question. So thanks for that.
We talk a lot about owning rumours. So, students are very quick to pass things on.
Yep.
Their parents are very quick to jump at what they hear, and often, we say to the parents, we won't believe everything that we hear about you, as long as you don't believe everything you hear about school. It's not always, you've got to apply the filter. We all need strong filters in schools.
Yeah.
Just so that things don't get away from anyone, but particularly young people. And I worry about the reputational damage for everyone, but particularly young people. And there's some pretty scary solutions to their problems these days, which were not around so much, probably when we were their age, and that they're the sort of things that keep me awake at night. And so that's why we will come at all of these challenges through the lens of education. It's what we do.
Yeah. With apologies to everyone, I'm just going to press pause on coming to you for a sec, Peter, because I'm really curious, Ika, why do rumours or misinformation spread so quickly, and even more quickly than maybe truth, if I can use that term?
Because we want to believe them. And so the most effective things, disinformation and misinformation, disinformation is created every day, misinformation is created every day in millions and millions of forms. And some of those stick and some of those spread. And those are the things that tap into our existing grievances and our existing distrust and our existing desire to other and all those sorts of things. And we've mapped specific fault lines across society that they're the places where we are really receptive to disinformation and misinformation. We're also in a context where a lot of us are getting our information on social media, where algorithms are very, very manipulative, because the model of social media is to make money. It is actually not to connect people. They are corporations. Corporations exist to make money. That is their fundamental reason for being. The way they make money is by selling engagement. And the more we engage with the platform, the more outraged we are, the more we're going to engage, the more we're going to share. And so that's a way that we're being manipulated in the way that the things that we see, the things we're exposed to, what comes up in our feed. It's no longer, depending on what sorts of platforms you might be on, it might not be things that your friends are sharing. It's things that are being shared by people that you don't even know, or organisations that you don't even know. And that's actually part of a very, very deliberate effort to make more money. So there's those two things of knowing what are those social fault lines, knowing how we get manipulated. We're people. We can be manipulated. We have emotions. And at the moment, we also have very real grievances. It is a very tricky time. For young people, it is a tricky time to be a young person. But it's also, we're in a housing crisis. We have rising inequality. We have all sorts of other things that make us really, really malleable.
Thanks, Ika. Peter, how's misinformation and disinformation showing up for you in your work in medical research?
I think it really affects every step in the journey. So, medical research is about formulating a good question, developing that into a plan of how you're going to go about addressing that question, attracting the funding to do the work, having the public trust to do the research, the clinical trials, and then translating that evidence into practice and public health outcomes. And the effect of misinformation and disinformation is felt across each piece of that journey. If I take an example, so our research program is quite broad, but one of the areas that we've been involved in is work on early life factors influencing babies and children's brain development and neurodevelopmental challenges that kids might have. And a lot of the media that's come up around that topic, and particularly zoning in on autism, is incredibly unhelpful. It's unhelpful because it makes it, I think, more difficult to have public trust in our discussion around potential factors in the modern environment that might be relevant to neurodevelopmental conditions. I think that then plays out in what a constrained funding environment we work in. The lack of public trust translates to the extent to which the public expects our government to invest in research, so it makes it more difficult to get the work funded. When we're then trying to do the work and convey the message, I think that's become much more difficult too, because there's so much noise. There's so much noise in the public arena around these topics. And the noise is often in sound bites. So it's hard to compete with sound bites when you're wanting to give a balanced and fair assessment of the evidence that's not sensationalised. And then to actually have people have their, for people to participate in our clinical trials, for example, I think is a profound act of trust. Particularly if we're testing an experimental treatment. Oh, sorry, a little bit closer. Thank you. When people choose to be in a clinical trial, they really, I think that it always doesn't amaze me, but I'm always impressed that people are, and I guess in my context, I'm impressed when they are willing to have their children involved in our clinical trials. And if they don't, if people don't trust me because there's so much noise around and people saying stuff that is then, clearly false, but no one's taking account for it, it makes the job of having people involve themselves in our work much more difficult. And then when we've got the findings, well, how does the community understand the difference between robust, well-established findings from medical research that we should be acting upon and things that are simple and clearly articulated but just false? So it makes that translation piece more difficult. And then I think the most frustrating piece is when we see public health achievements that being eroded by misinformation and disinformation, and clearly vaccinations, the case in point here, where we have very high quality evidence to tell us that in the US alone, in the last 20 years, the vaccination program has prevented something like 30 million infectious diseases among children. This is children only. It's prevented in the order of 5 to 10 million hospital admissions and 1 million deaths. And so to have people coming out and make assertions about vaccinations that are just factually incorrect is incredibly frustrating, because that then erodes public engagement in those vaccination programs.
I'm probably pouring fuel on the fire here, Peter, but some of you may have seen the article published in The Age a couple of days ago that described how the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention in the US has changed their website to repudiate their long-standing view that vaccinations don't cause autism. So the fuel on the fire, how do you emotionally respond to that?
Oh, it's pretty frustrating. Yeah, I mean, it always strikes me as just extraordinary, actually, that that these sorts of things can go into the public domain with so little accountability. The thing about public policy, health policy, is that if you get it wrong, there are implications. If you have an intervention that's harmful, or you fail to implement an intervention that will be helpful, then there are people who will be damaged by that. And I find it absolutely puzzling that people can so, from my point of view, recklessly put out information and not really feel a sense of responsibility for what the adverse impact of that information might be. So we reduce our vaccination rates on the basis of what is clearly, at best, disinformation. There will be children that get very sick and children that die. That's the consequence. And so that's, for me, that's very frustrating. But I guess the other thing I also feel at the same time is that I think it's an opportunity, because I do think that there is an appetite growing publicly for balanced, calm, well-considered information.
I want to go there in a little bit, not right now, but I think one of the questions that's really important for us to engage in this conversation is how do we remain open to new information and not bunker down in our own echo chambers, as it were, even if that's one that we trust, right? So I think that's important for us to engage, but I'm going to resist the temptation to go there now. We'll get there in a little bit. Most of us, as we engage this topic, do it as consumers of information, but I just want to spend a few minutes to ask you guys who, many of you in your position are communicating information into a context where misinformation and even disinformation is ubiquitous, right? So I think about Michael Barwon Water and recycled water and some of the innovation projects that you're involved in, where in order to have the public buy into those, you are putting forward ideas that are probably not well understood, or and you talked before about the need for you to be a trusted institution, or your aspiration to be a trusted institution. How do you navigate that from the purveyor of information side rather than the consumer of information?
Yeah, that's thanks, Cole. I think the first thing generally from a government to be trusted within the community is that we have to be transparent. We have to, put the information, in my context, in a research context, put it out there. It's documented. It's all available so that it can be challenged and questioned. So I think transparency is really important to build trust within communities. Building trust builds social license. The permission, the imprimatur from the community for water authorities to, build big infrastructure because it's a changing climate. I was just looking the other day, just on the point of climate change, and I was thinking as you were speaking, Peter, that vaccines to the medical world is almost climate to the water world, where agencies again in the United States are removing the words climate change once again, and that erodes the social license, or and it erodes trust within ourselves. In terms of perhaps, what can we do? We've got some things to do better as well. I think I was talking to my children in the lead up to this session, and I was asking them how they consume news, how do they get their information. I mean, it's on the phone. There's no Channel 9 or Channel 7 reading The Age or The Australian. It's just gone. They don't even know. It's what, Dad? It's sound bites, literally a minute long, 3 minutes long, and so forth. So I think there's an opportunity there for when we are communicating what we're doing to really to almost tailor it to so that it's accessible for them. Because if we publish and something we're doing just lately at Barwon Water is we're looking at AI, how we can use AI, for example. So when we take a big long research report, often these research reports, hundreds of pages. Nobody is reading a 200 or 300 page report. That's just not happening. So the question for us is, how can we actually make that accessible to different audiences that they can at least get a hook, and then they know where to find a little bit more. And if they're really curious, to your point, Simon, they can, go and read that full report. So I think there's something in that. There's an opportunity to, for ourselves as agencies to continue to be proactive, to be transparent, and to start to tailor the information from, again, in my example, big, long, complex reports, so that people can understand, interpret, and then, action, do things.
Let me just thank those of you that submitted questions ahead of time, and I want to go to a question now, and I'll throw it to the panel actually, related to what Michael's been talking about, from Robert. Thanks, Robert, if you're here tonight. And the question is about how large sections of the media and government and business are often complicit in the proliferation of this problem that we're talking about. And the question is it up to us as citizens to have to sort through what's true and what's not, and what's the chaff and where's the wheat, if you like, for that? So when, I can hear as you talk, Michael, the commitment to this, and you understand the challenge as that goes out into the community. Is it just up to us as citizens? How do you to sort out what's true and what's not? Maybe you can go first, Michael, but I'm keen on what the other panellists think about that too.
Yeah, well, I mean, just a quick observation on that one, Cole. I think, again, from an agency perspective, independence of, keeping a sort of, I guess, degree of independence from the government of the day, so that we're not sort of seen or viewed by the community that, oh, well, we're lurching this way because that's what the government wants, the agency or the institution to say, or, there's another election and we've lurched this way, as the political winds blow. So I think, building that in sense, or, building the mechanisms and the struts for institutional independence, so that, when there is a change of, whether it's a government or there's another, major influence that's exerting pressure, that, it's robust, and it's built through time as well. So I think the importance of political independence is pretty critical.
Yep. Ika, is it up to individuals?
It's also up to individuals. Sorry, there is work in this for all of you, for all of us. But no, we need strong regulations, and we need platforms, and we need institutions that are operating in the public interest. And if we don't have them, we need to create them. In terms of, as Michael was saying, transparency is key for all institutions, including political. So not even the ones that will be depoliticised. For politicians and for government agencies, we also need to make sure that we are being transparent, that we are competent, and that we're consistent. And whenever we're those things, and we're actually always bringing the narrative and everything we communicate to the community back to those three things. We're explaining how a decision was made, what the information was that went into it. We're demonstrating our competence by making sure we are actually skilling up, making sure we have the infrastructure to meet the very, very different year that we have this year compared to last year. This is not the same operating environment we had 5 years ago. And then with the consistency, making sure that we have strategies, that we've gone through the process of rigorously developing policy and strategy which will guide our responses to all sorts of things, whether it's around climate action and the impact it has on water, whether it's around health and the way that we're responding from a medical perspective, so that we can point back to that and say, this is the thing that got debated and passed, that we have all had an opportunity to have an input into, and that's why this decision was made. And at the moment, we haven't got that environment yet laid out, but we can. There's nothing that's preventing us from being able to create that. We do also need to rely on other institutions. So obviously we've got 3 really key, or 4, I guess I'm local government here. We've got 4 really key institutions represented here, and this is something that needs to be addressed in all of our institutions and others. But it also is something that, there is a role for the private sector. Remembering that the private sector is fundamentally motivated by profits, and should be, and is not going to, at the end of the day, operate in the public interest in the way that government organisations do. So making sure we really clearly separate that in our minds and our expectations of who's doing what and who we expect to do what. And then also making sure that we are also building our own digital literacy, critical literacy, media literacy, and having the conversations we need to have to be able to navigate this as well.
I'll come to you in a sec, Michael, but Simon or Peter, any response to this question?
I feel like I'm going to bring it back to school age level all the time, which I think in some ways is simplifying things. Ika mentioned just explaining. I think certainly with young people, they're pretty good at challenging us all of the time around information, particularly if they've got to do something. And so knowing your why, explaining the why is really important for us, because at the end of the day, knowledge is power, information is power for them. So yeah, they're not as probably as transactional as they used to be, I think, in some ways, students. So they want to know why they've got to do something. You know, why do I have to wear a mask? What does it do? Yeah, and I mean little ones asking these questions as well. So individual accountability and the citizenship that comes with what they do on a day-to-day basis is something that we need to help them with. And even, I think we touched on before, just those algorithms. Algorithms for me is sort of probably a dirty word in many ways, because it's what's feeding that beast of misinformation for our students and for our staff. That's what that doesn't get through the filter sometimes.
Just before I answer, I was just interested. Are there places in the world that are exemplars of what you're describing?
I think there are lots of places in the world that are doing really good things, and our next task will be about getting those different pieces of the puzzle and marrying them up differently. But there are some great examples, I mean, from the health sector, and again, from the private health sector. In the US, from a paediatrician practice actually, that was targeted by a disinformation campaign because they were promoting the use of the HPV vaccine, and that was something that was that attracted the attention of a very organised group that were promoting anti-vaccine use, and particularly anti-that vaccine, and they were trying to respond by sharing the scientific evidence, by doing all of those things, and it wasn't cutting through. And actually other paediatric practices heard about and saw what was happening, and they decided they were going to come to their aid, and that actually this was something where they needed to have collective impact. And so all of these other medical practices came to the aid, started responding to these things online, started going to the media, started putting out their own media releases. So now it wasn't this group that was targeting one practice. They actually had this whole ecosystem of practices that has now spread around the entire world. It's called Shots Heard Around the World. It's a separately incorporated organisation, and it's not just medical. But it started with that one moment, and recognising the way that we can actually step up in those moments. And we don't need to wait for new regulations and legislation, all those sorts of things. We can actually use the tools that are already available to us.
So, I mean, I think at a systems level and a government and private sector level, I completely agree with everything Ika said. I do think there's something cultural that needs to happen too, though, and something that I'm not sure if we've lost it. Maybe that's just me sort of getting old and feeling like it used to be different. But I would love to hear in private conversations and in the public domain people asking the question, you know, is there anything that gives you pause for thought about that view? Because I just seem to so rarely hear it, and it puzzles me. People present an incredibly strident view with important implications, and there seems to be no pause for thought that they might be wrong. And the other question I'd love to see us asking, and again, I think it's a cultural piece, it's something we need to be, you know, doing with our kids at home, in the classroom, that idea of the second and the third question is, you know, can you tell me about a time that you got it wrong? And a view that you had and that you really tried to convey forcibly, you look back on it and you think that was wrong. Because that's one of the things that I find also kind of frustrating and puzzling, is that we'll hear these incredibly strong views, for example, around the mRNA vaccines in COVID, and this idea that the sky was going to fall once people started having mRNA vaccines. Well, the sky clearly has not fallen, but no one has come out in the public domain and said, yeah, I think we got that wrong actually. And I'd
call again to all of you for coming out on a weekday and participating in this really important conversation. Please join me in thanking our panel. safe drive or public transport home, or walking if you're lucky enough to live that close. Thanks again.